Drivers, start your engines!
Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there, I want you to be perfect!
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. It's him, but he talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver, pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger, no sweating working for the man, alright.
Good evening, race fans. Welcome to the Hoobazoo Radio Network and welcome to Drafting the Circuits. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour as we talk about a big weekend in racing and a big weekend ahead. Joining me in the studio, I've got Richard Youden and Luis Torres. Fellas, how we doing tonight?
We're good, thank you.
Pretty good.
All right, so there's a lot to digest this week. Well, let's start with the Indycars at St. Pete. This is a race that is traditionally the season opener, but it was the second race of the season this year in order to make sure that we could have some fans there, and we did have fans there. Nice amount of fans. St. Pete is always a great event. These street races, especially the ones that have been around a while, are always a great event. Whether or not the race is a great show is always up for debate. You know, some folks will complain that the race was dominated by Colton Herta, but my gosh, through the field, there was a lot of great racing there. And you know, and then there's a lot of stuff to digest. But first and foremost, Richard, you have told me in the past a couple times, and it's you know, a couple recently, you're not 100% sold on Colton Herta. Did anything he did this weekend change your mind about that at all?
Oh, good grief! I knew this was going to come up. He was impressive. I'll give him that much. He was very, very impressive. I think my comments on him aren't so much about when he's quick, because he is undoubtedly quick, you know, in places we've seen that. It's more along his racecraft and his ability to get the job done, and you know, that sort of Scott Dixon and Will Power sort of mentality about, you know what, fifth is a good position. If your car's not there, let's bring it home fifth. Let's not try and do something you can't with your equipment. So he was incredibly impressive this weekend. There's no doubt about it. And there's been a lot of very good things said about him by a lot of very influential people. You know, especially within the Andretti camp. You know, talks about, you know, if he was in Formula One, then the US would love somebody like that, and they're probably true. But again, I can't see that happening unless he goes on to dominate this season or, you know, the next couple, and really get some serious attention from some of the teams over there. But yeah, the kid's impressive. You know, there's no doubt about it. And you know, I think my comments, as I said, are more based around when he's not got a car underneath him that can win a race. You know, where's he going to be then? Yeah,
but that's all things he'll learn. You know,
of course it is. Of course it is.
But I think, you know, potential wise, gosh, the kid is great. You know what I mean?
Oh, without any hesitation.
You know, when he's on, he's on. But you know, it's interesting, the Formula One talk, because it's really grown some legs, and it's all based on, if somebody asked Mario a question in a press conference, right? And Mario says, "Yeah, I think the U.S. would, you know, be crazy about this kid in Formula One." But I don't think there's any real serious interest from any Formula One teams in Colton Herta or anybody else from IndyCar series, for that matter.
No,
because,
for a while, because remember, Newgarden was the talk, but now we got to talk about that age number, because that is vital now in Formula One. If you're like in your late 20s,
he'd be a veteran if he was in Formula One now.
Yeah, Newgarden will, but Colton's rather young. Yeah. I believe he's just
21, isn't he?
21, yeah.
He's in the ideal spot for him that is young, that he can probably give it a go. But then there's that super license, which was probably the core talk of what Mario was frustrated about, how some IndyCar guys don't get the opportunity. Yet Nikita Mazepin could come in, albeit in some fairness, very minimal. He's got those 2 feature F2 wins, but that's about it.
Yeah, but those feature race, you know, I understand exactly what Mario was saying there. I think that IndyCar certainly to my mind, is a superior race series to Formula 2. It's probably ranked, in single-seater world, I think it's ranked second behind Formula 1. So if you can get super license points from Formula 2, Formula 3, even Super Formula over in Japan, I think that IndyCar needs to follow suit with those super license points. But
I fully agree, yep.
But also, wouldn't you say as well that this is the danger that IndyCar has? It's got to detract itself from this comparison with Formula 1 to be really successful, personally, my opinion. And if they keep turning around and saying, oh, look, our young guys want to go to Formula 1, well, it shouldn't be like that. And you shouldn't be looking at, the half dozen guys now that are racing IndyCar that have raced Formula 1. You're almost looking at it as if, well, this is their last option sort of thing, or this is their, fallback plan, which it may well be. But if you keep promoting it as that, then it's always going to play second fiddle to Formula 1. And I don't think that's fair on it. I think IndyCar has the ability to stand by its own 2 feet. And
exactly, yeah. But
you should be embracing when guys like Roman Grosjean, who, in all fairness, is pretty not a million miles away from the peak of his career in his early 30s. You should be looking at him coming to IndyCar, not as we've got nowhere else to go, as a real boost for IndyCar, rather than trying to say, hey, look, we've got to try and get our young kids out to Formula 1. Well, no. If Colton Herta can win 4 or 5 championships in IndyCar, he probably will not get the financial rewards that he would do in Formula 1, but he still had a damn good career out of it and achieved a huge amount considering the talent of the drivers he's against. It's a very dangerous game that they've got to try and play, a balance to promote itself, but not also be too disparaging about itself.
Yeah, but I think even beyond the IndyCar comparison to Formula 1 is the desire to have an American driver in the series. Realistically, when we had John Orovitz on the show, he mentioned that the last American to win a Formula 1 race was in 1978 with Mario. And since then we've had Danny Sullivan, we've had Eddie Cheever, we've had Scott Speed,
Michael Andretti with that
Michael
Andretti for a short time, Rossi for 5 starts, but there's not been. I mean, Scott Speed was the last guy to run a whole season. Yeah, so I know that Liberty. You would think Liberty would be really much behind an American driver in Formula 1, but at the same time,
I mean, Liberty also part ownership with Meyer Shank as well, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, they've got an involvement in that as well. Yeah. And I think we covered it a lot when John was on the show and we did that special with him. It's the mentality. There's something more to it than just having talent, because there is zero reason whatsoever why the country of your birth affects how talented you are as a race car driver. The opportunities at 5 and 6 year old kids to get into karting in the US is pretty much the same as it is in the UK and the rest of Europe and the rest of the world. There's a mentality there that is different between Europe and the US. And that's not just reflected in motorsport, that's reflected in all sports at that age. And I don't think that's ever going to change. And until that changes, you're not going to see a kid come through Indy Lights, for example, and go into Formula 1, or IndyCar and go into Formula 1. The only way you're going to see an American-born driver in Formula 1 is if they move to the UK at 10 years old, 11, 12 years old, and go through the European ladder and have that discipline and that training. And you're seeing that McLaren have signed this 12, 13-year-old karting champion, and I'm not even going to pronounce his name because I can't. I'm sorry.
Yes, his name is very difficult to pronounce, yes.
He was born in the US, but again, he's had to go to Europe at that age to get not the opportunity, but the culture. And that's the big difference. You look at all the drivers come over from Formula 1 and they come to IndyCar and they go, oh, IndyCar's great because, you can meet the fans and you can talk to them and you don't have all the stuffiness, if you like, and restrictions that you have in Formula 1. And that's very true. But you have those restrictions and you have that stuffiness in Formula One. That's not going to change. So if you want to get into Formula One, you've got to adapt to that lifestyle. It's not going to do it for you. So if you come from a background where there is, it's a lot more laid back and open, it's so hard to make that transition into a restricted environment like Formula One and a disciplined environment like Formula One.
All right, Richard, point well taken. Point well taken.
Sorry.
I was going to say we beat this one to death a couple of weeks ago.
We did.
But I want to talk a little bit more about the St. Pete race. So the
race was sorry.
It's all good, but yeah, you're talking about that. I think Colton was in Europe for a couple of years before going back to the American route to go through the Indy Lights to IndyCar for sure. But you have a good point in that regard. The
Absolutely.
race itself,
let's talk about the race itself. So who are the guys that Colton Herta held off at the end of the race? A couple of guys named Newgarden and Pagano. You know what I mean? That's pretty brilliant in itself. And then you had Will Power had problems in qualifying, which is, Will Power's problem in qualifying were odd. Because here's a guy who was like, come in, clock in, win a pole.
Especially St. Pete, which he's done like 8 times before.
Yeah. So, but then there's this thing about the Firestone tires. I don't know if you heard this one, Louise, and the lottery system that the tires are given out to. Guys are given out, and I think Power said an off the cuff comment about getting a bad set, which caused Firestone to vehemently defend themselves. That all the tires are the same for every driver. So, I mean, do you feel like Will Power got a bad set of tires or maybe his setup was just all off?
It's hard. It's really hard when there's two sides in the argument to really pinpoint what might have happened. But to start off 20th at a track that is synonymously known for track position is everything difficult to pass street course, it certainly set them in a kind of a difficult hole. And what I saw from the race itself, before Jimmy Johnson had brought out the first of 2 full course yellows, he was stuck. He couldn't get any track position, to the point I said to myself before the caution happened, the only way I see Power gaining any positions or have an ideal result, which is key to be in the championship hunt, is to be in having these strong runs right out of the gate, is through strategy of full course yellows. Probably had a bank on it. And there was no other driver that really benefited from those full course cautions than Will Power, because after that, he was basically one of the few that was gaining positions with relative ease. He got better over time, and he managed to get a top 10 out of it. But for the tire and the setup, it pretty much depends on which side of the argument you're on. Because if Firestone's defensive side, you got to understand that side. But also from Power, who rarely has to start deep in the field or have a bad qualifying, you got to speculate, you got to wonder something. There's always both sides of the argument. I just try to play it by ear, try to see which one is more reasonable, which one is not, without really leaning towards one or the other.
Yeah, and to Will's credit, I mean, he actually had a pretty good day, considering he started in 20th. I believe he ended up 8th, which is not too shabby for starting so deep in the field on a place that's, again, like I said, historically hard to pass. So, but we had other guys that had problems. Pato had some problems. Rossi had problems again. Here's Rossi, a guy who's, again, saying nothing but the championship will do this year. Now he's 2 races in and mired deep in the points now.
16th out of 24.
I know, right? Had a run in with Graham Rahal. They were able to kind of patch that up.
It was just a racing ordeal.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, what hurt him a bit is before the incident happened at the right rear, that came off as a relatively slow pit stop, and then when he got out, Rahal was in good position. The moment they the first tango was what hurt the tire, and it was very difficult to steer. So at first I was thinking, oh geez, this will not bode well. Then realizing it was the tire going down. I think what was it? I saw a Twitter comment that Brendan Eves, a Rota Indy driver, was talking about how there's really not much a driver could do when a tire goes down when it comes to turning. So it was just a whole racing ordeal. And that's the grand takeaway. But for both guys, especially for Rossi, championship or bust, that's not good. For Rahal, it seems like they're that a little bit close to being a dark horse contender for the title. that sets him back. He's outside the top 10 of the points going into Texas. That's not good for his cause either, because it seems like Ray Hall, Letterman, Lanigan could be up there, but mulligans are going to bite him. This time was just a racing ordeal that bit him rather than just little circumstances like pit stops a year ago.
Yeah. Now I want to bring this up about the little bit of racing content. And Richard, I want to direct this question towards you. When there was that little tangle between Sato and
Yes.
James Hinchcliffe, and again, now I want to say Hinchcliffe was a little unkind in his comments to say that Sato run out of talent because
yes,
as I watched that thing, it looked like Sato had a line in it that
great move.
Crash was all on Hinch, but so as they touched tires, right? The guys in the broadcast booth mentioned that the valve stem just snapped off, which caused the tire to deflate. And then there's another one later in the race where they said the same thing. Oh, the valve stem snapped off.
I think that was Rossi,
I was gonna say I've been watching Indy racing my whole life, and I can count on one hand how many times I've heard this. Oh, they knocked the valve stem off in a. So I mean, does the valve stem stick that far out on the side of IndyCar tire? Yeah, you know, to me, I was like, what?
Yeah, I don't. I'm not 100% certain on its exact location, but typically you'd want to make it. You do make it as close to the rim of the tire as you possibly can for, ease of changing the pressures. Because what will happen is typically throughout the weekend, your tires will be mounted on the rims, they'll be pressurized to a nominal pressure, and then throughout the race, the strategy guys and the race engineers will be getting feedback from the driver, and they'll be adjusting the pressures on the tires before they put them on the car, pretty much up until like the lap that the driver makes a pit stop on. So they do have to be easy access. They do have to be quick enable in terms of it's not like your road car where you've got you're fiddling around with this little valve stem. They do have to be relatively easy to get to, so that does inevitably make them relatively fragile. But yeah, it was a little bit unusual, and it did sort of strike me as a little bit strange that they had two failures in such similar ways in such quick succession. But I think the both of those instances were purely racing incidences. We talked about the George Russell thing a couple of weeks ago. The same with the Sato thing. If the gap disappears, or if there's a gap there and you can take it and you don't take it, then you're really doing your job. So I don't have an issue with the driving in either of those moves. They were just unlucky. As you've said, those sort of contacts happen hundreds of times in the season, and nothing ever happens apart from a few egos get hurt.
But this is the weird thing, though, right? So we saw Grosjean, right, brush the wall how many times?
Oh yeah. And somebody else was as
3
well.
times.
Yeah, but we didn't see his valve stems just snap off like that. That's why I thought the whole thing unusual. Like I've been watching IndyCar my whole life, I've never heard this. Oh, the valve stem popped off. And Paul Tracy says it like it happens all the time.
I think what you could also see, because obviously when you hit the wall that you're hitting is a rigid structure, whereas when you hit a tire on tire, the actual tire can deform and sort of go into the tire well. Right, obviously a wall's not going to deform in the same way, so maybe that's what you're seeing, rather than just purely the physical contact. It's actually, if you like, the wheel is being deformed and ingressing into the wheel rim of the other car, which is knocking the valve stem out. I don't think the valve stem is proud of the tire of the wheel rim, let's put it that way. So if you kiss a wall flush, like completely at a perpendicular to the wall, or parallel to the wall, I guess, from the wheel face, you probably won't knock it out because it won't stick proud. But if you're going in there with a tire which deforms and contorts to the shape of the wheel, then you wrong place, wrong time, and it can probably knock it off quite easily.
All right, well there you go. Thank you for that explanation, Richard. So Louise, what are your other takeaways from St. Pete?
You mentioned about Pato earlier. It seems like to me a little bit, I don't know if it's just in general, just how it looked to me, the Pato with the primaries just could not get going over time. And same goes with Renus VK when he was on those Reds over time. Neither of the two could get a grip on it. They were getting mauled by pretty much several cars to the point they had to go with the primaries. Whereas some that stuck with the Reds held their own, and the ones that held their own are mostly the veterans. Like if I recall, Penske drivers that were up in the podium spots, they were running those kind of tires, and they did just fine. I take it's like one of those experience versus inexperienced ordeals on street course adapting to certain tire compounds. Or I don't think it's much team related, just more or less trying to adapt to it. And I think that's what bit those two young guys. But nonetheless, for VK's case, he did pretty admirable. He's still in the top 10 in points after 2 rounds. Just curious to see how he does at Texas. If he gets out of there with a top 10, stays out of trouble, especially like we mentioned, it's Texas. That would, but now he's more mature and grown. So I don't see that being
he needs
problem.
a little redemption at Texas. Texas is where he had an issue last year.
The most disastrous series debut a driver would ever have in my book.
Right. So, but I think he's held his own, and again, like you said, pretty good run at St. Pete. The Carpenter team isn't exactly setting the world on fire, but he was right up there in the mix. So good for him.
What was with? I was a bit surprised about Alex Palou sort of being mired in the mid pack.
He had an relatively off weekend.
Yeah.
At one point, like 5 ago, he was 13th, and then when I looked at the final results, I was like, "What happened to Palou? He was outside he was like 17th, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, geez, it's like, drop him out of the championship lead? No, he's still 2 points ahead.
There you go. I did notice something funny, and it just from watching it from a spectator standpoint and listening to the announcers. The number of times the announcers and the sort of experts say, "Oh well, over the winter I was talking to the driver," and how much do these, the press guys talk to the drivers? I mean, I don't talk to my wife as much as these guys talk to their drivers. I just find it hilarious, as if they've got like a personal hotline to these guys. It was. It's just a weird sort of dynamic. It's making, hey, we're buddies with all the drivers, sort of thing. It sounds, I'm being cynical here. I know.
It kind of feels just that way compared to NASCAR, to where, like, I remember in the media center at Daytona after Almirola won the dual race, he was excited to just see media people in the media center. So it's kind of like it sounds like the opposite with IndyCar almost.
Yeah, it's like, we're buddies with all the drivers and we talk to them every day. I don't know. I mean, they may do. I mean, hey, they genuinely may have this really close connection with all the drivers, but it sounded like they have like a family reunion every week with them.
Yeah, that is true.
That's a point. That was just a little takeaway that I noticed from watching the race. It was like you could almost like, good job I didn't take a shot every time they said it, because I wouldn't have made it halfway.
All right, so now, Louise, you mentioned Palou is still leading the championship by 2 points.
Yep.
Closely behind him are Alex Palou and then I'm sorry. Scott Dixon. Yeah, Alex Palou is still leading the points, and Scott Dixon is right there, only 3 points out of the lead, which got to make everybody else uncomfortable. I mean, Dixon hasn't made a lot of headlines yet, but there he is.
He's second.
It's been a good while since he's won too. I think we're getting close to that 1 year mark since he's last won an IndyCar race. Because he won the first 3 and then he won one more, but after that he hasn't won in a good while. So we'll be curious to see how Texas will pan out, because there's 2 races with a lot of.
They were dominant there last year, weren't they?
Yeah, he basically eviscerated the field. From what I understand, some drivers were not happy with the PJ1 and all the track surface, how it handles. So that's going to be a big question mark, I'd imagine. And honestly, it should not be the big thing. Like last year was the PJ1 was like one of the big stories of the season opener a year ago. So be curious to see how that plays out.
Well, I mean, they tested there at Texas and they said it's still not quite what they'd like for IndyCar. They're still not going to get, a couple of different lines because, even though they've tried to scrub that stuff off there's enough of it remaining.
Yeah.
That it's still. So it'll be interesting to see what we see in Texas. We've got a doubleheader.
A 1 day of one practice session and one qualifying, which I believe is the same rule as it was last year. First lap determines the lineup for race 1, and lap 2 determines the lineup for race 2.
Right, and they're qualifying in race trim,
Yeah, on Saturday, because Sunday is just the race itself and go.
Right, but they're going to qualify in race trim rather than trimming it down for qualifying. So
yeah,
and then there's little speculation this will help out the guys newer to the series. There's somebody had written an article about that, but so with that being said, because we need to make sure we keep time in the show to discuss all of our topics. So Louise, who do you like for Texas 1 and Texas 2?
Let's go Texas number 1. Let's go with Newgarden, and Texas number 2. Probably I'm going to bank on I'll be curious to see how Colton does in race number 2. I feel like Colton will get it done in 2. Because that 26 car did pretty good with Sac Beach. I imagine Colton will make it exponentially better. I'm curious to see how Pietro Fittipaldi does with that 51 car, because it seems like they're there, but we'll see how Pietro does in his first IndyCar start since 2018. Because I've been looking forward to see how he does. More so come the month of May, so he can finally get that Indy 500 that he was hoping to have done already.
Yeah, so they have confirmed Pietro for the ovals that Grosjean's not racing, and
Connor Daly's going to run for
Connor Daly has been confirmed for all the ovals that Max Chilton's not running,
which is just all but Indy.
Yeah. So, and of course, Connor will be in Ed Carpenter car for Indy.
Mm-hmm. And the third car, the 47.
Right. So now, Richard, who do you like for Texas 1 and Texas 2?
Oh, I think we'll go. I mean, I think you can't look past Scott Dixon, really, can you? If he gets it all together, and somebody go for one of these part-time drivers who's doing the ovals. Ed Carpenter, I think, could be pretty. He's racing, isn't he? He's stepping up for these races, so I think he could have a good one or the other anyway.
All right, and I'm going to go with Will Power. Bangs out a win in Texas 1 and gets his championship hopes off to a grinding start there. And Texas 2, I'm going to go with I don't know. I'm thinking about former Texas winners. And Graham Rahal comes to mind. Hinchcliffe comes to mind, who's run well there. But I really want to say probably Dixon, who's nearly unbeatable anywhere on any given day. So that being said, Talladega, Brad Keselowski won. So now,
fortunately, 0 red flags in the Cup race. Big sigh of relief.
Well, okay. So now officially, all of the Team Penske drivers on both their Xfinity and Cup are locked into the chase or the playoffs. Correct. Yep. So good for them. And it's early in the season. They've got all their guys locked in for the championship, which is outstanding for them. But Keselowski was not dominant all day. He was up there near the front all day. He's always does well at that. But the only lap he led was the checker flag lap.
Yeah, and he had to bounce back from that big wreck in stage 1, where his teammate Joey Logano had a blowover after a little battle between drafting wars with Denny Hamlin and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. went awry. And much like Brendan Gaughan, Logano flew up. The difference was he put it back. He slid on his roof. Didn't do a full 360 like Gaughan did. So style points, Gaughan gets the win on that regard. But Logano got hit on the roof by Bubba Wallace. Not terrible in Bubba's case because he went on to win stage 2, but for Logano, and it caved the roof down to where he felt it, and he was very livid about it because of just how the package, the safety infrastructure, because brought up Ryan Newman because we're 14 months removed from what happened with Ryan Newman at Daytona where Corey LaJoie ran, hit Newman's roof. Fortunately, we still have Newman around. But after seeing what the damage of Logano's roof, it made me wonder. We've been dealing with roofing caving in for a good while now. That's twice in the last 14 months. You think they would find a way to make the roof a little bit more stronger so it doesn't cave down. And that's where I understand Joey's frustration. But Joey's no stranger to being the one causing these incidents that probably had done some harm than good on others. because there's still some people out there that feel like Logano is the reason why Denny Hamlin's 2013 went down to hell because of the injury of Fontana. It's just his driving style just does not register well to a lot of people. But for, as I mentioned, tough day for Logano, but for Keselowski, he was involved. He rallied back. He was able to get the help he needed to beat Matt Benedetto, who had the strongest car outside of the Gibbs stable, because the Gibbs decided to take themselves out, Hamlin and Truex at the end of stage 2, to where it was basically De Benedetto's race to lose. But wasn't meant to be for De Benedetto. Big gain for Keselowski. Yes, the one lap certainly count for him. And now, what we talked about at the beginning of the year, can Penske find a way to have luck on their side? Now they have the luck, in my honest opinion. They've won.
Yeah. It seemed like they couldn't buy a win early in the season, but now they're lock, stock, and barrel, ready to go. Now, Richard, I know you have some thoughts on this, so I want to allow you to soapbox it up a little bit, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, I think so. The comments that Joe Logano made post accident were very valid. And when I say they, I'm talking about NASCAR and the governing body. They're playing with fire here. We've seen in the last 4 or 5 years a number of serious accidents that purely by luck, and I'm not going to put it any more than that, we haven't lost a driver or have a driver seriously injured. Logano, that was a pretty wild ride, but you look at what happened to, I mentioned Ryan Newman, and going back a couple of years before that, Austin Dillon's accident in Daytona. These are serious accidents. These aren't just somebody brushed a wall and took a couple of cars out. The problem that we have is motorsport is fundamentally dangerous, and that's why people watch it, and that's why the drivers get paid the amount of money they do. However, NASCAR push it. They market themselves off it. They market themselves off the big one, at Talladega. Who's going to be involved in the big one? And it's on the TV commercials a week before the race, 2 weeks before the race. Get your tickets to Talladega and come and watch the big one. Well, 1 year you're going to do that, and you're not going to watch the big one. You're going to watch somebody be killed. And look at what damage that'll do to the sport. I know that the super speedways are a spectacle, and they certainly are. They can be mesmerizing when you watch these packs form. They're almost organic in the way they race, and the skills involved in plate racing, or obviously not technically restricted plate anymore, but it's an art form, and the skill of the driver is huge. But you have to legitimately question: is it worth it? At what point do we say, okay, we're pushing this too far? And on the Formula One side, Daniel Ricciardo made the same comment. You look at the way Formula One PR are pushing, 2020 highlights. It's all about who had the big accidents, and that's not right. NASCAR doesn't have the racecraft, if you like, of a Formula One or an Indycar, where you see the great overtaking moves and somebody diving down the inside into a tight corner and something like that, because it's just the nature of the racing. So they publicize these things, and they are running a very, very, very dangerous game here. At some point, a driver is going to get seriously hurt, if not killed, and it's going to be purely in the name of entertainment. And that's got to stop. This isn't the gladiators in Rome 2,000 years ago. These are young guys, some of them with families, some of them with, and I admit nobody's forcing them to go in the cars. They do it out of choice. But NASCAR has a responsibility to these guys, and they have a responsibility to the sport, and they have the responsibility to spectators. I remember when I was 10 years old in 1994, watching the San Marino Grand Prix when Senna was killed. And to me, that was the first time I'd ever experienced that. And my parents having to explain to me what was going on. But that isn't how these things should be dealt with. And I worry that they're missing, it's been so long, thankfully, since they had a death in NASCAR, that they're missing the point. Formula One had, the loss of Jules Bianchi, and IndyCar had, Dan Wheldon and Justin Wilson, and they've done something about it with the halo and the aero screen. NASCAR's response, we stuck another piece of steel tubing in the car. Well, you know what? That's not going to fix the problem. When one of these things goes down bad, it's going to go down real bad. And you can have as much tubing and crap like that in the cars, and it's not going to make any difference.
Okay, so, I mean, do you feel like we've reached an era in NASCAR where you got a whole generation of drivers that are desensitized to
100%
the possibility of death? Because this is what happened in Formula One before Senna died. You had it'd been so long,
huge accidents, and
you walked away from it. The same thing. So so NASCAR has been 2001 since somebody died in a Cup Series, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there was somebody in Mexico, wasn't there, that in one of the NASCAR Mexican Series was killed a few years ago. But in the grand scheme of things, yes, from a publicity
it's been 12 years when that happened with what was Carlos Pardo.
Thing, but
ordeal, really,
in the grand scheme of things, yes.
No, I was going to say it's like that ordeal, that whole thing disintegrated. And then we're talking about roofs. You brought up the good point I was alluding to. It's like you got to find a way to structurize the roof to the point where it doesn't cave it, because otherwise.
But you don't. But that's not the fix. The fix is to stop this from happening.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have
like blowovers and all that.
The fix is to keep the car on the ground. And they, NASCAR, to their credit, have been trying to keep the cars on the ground on these super speedways forever. You remember when they first put the roof flaps on back in the 90s?
Oh, the Roush flaps,
yeah.
But again, I know there's the sort of the romance of going to Daytona and Talladega. I get that part of it, but you're trying to push water uphill here. It's not easy. You're not going to stop it from happening. These cars are so fast, and the aerodynamics are designed in such a way that if you want to make it so that the cars will not flip over, you're going to change the complete shape and makeup of the car from an aerodynamic standpoint. And then everyone's going to bitch because the cars don't look right. It's like I hate to say it now, because I value drivers. Having worked with drivers, I value their lives far more than the entertainment standpoint. Just, you've got to draw the line in the sand somewhere and say, we cannot do super speedway races anymore. Pure and simple. I know that it'll alienate some fans, and that's terrible, but if it saves drivers' lives and the sport's still entertaining, then it's what we need to do. I'm sorry, you've got to, if you were to take that into any commercial business, like I work in, like everybody works in, a normal commercial business, and run a risk assessment, you would not go anywhere near a super speedway on a normal commercial business decision, because the risks are too high. And what would you lose? You may lose a few fans, but you'd lose more fans when drivers are killed. But the problem is that also NASCAR, they build on it, they play on it, they promote it, they want it.
No, without a doubt. Every commercial for Talladega say, when will the big one happen? And then so
even now to this day, I have that stigma. It's like lap four. If they make it through lap 4, then that's the first step, because the first super speed. Well, the first time I saw a Talladega race was when Newman and 26 other cars were involved. I was thinking lap 4's been etched in my mind. Now the big question is, can they make it through the last lap of a stage without wrecking? It's like, is this like 2017?
And that stage racing, has just encouraged it. They've made it worse.
Yeah, even
and the green-white checker encourages it even more.
Yeah,
this race didn't have like the whole field all destroyed. At least we had about over half the field of cars still with minimal to no damage. So that
it wasn't terrible, but
the blocking were super aggressive, and how finicky and sensitive they get during a movement and all of that. That's the like hair hairline racing and all that stuff. But the fact they made it through, that was good, but still makes you wonder. One bad move, big pack of cars.
Oh, I mean it's getting beyond, you know, the only thing that's going to stop it is by somebody being killed. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, but that's the only thing that's going to stop it, pure and simple. And even then, would it stop it? I genuinely don't know. You know,
I don't know, because you've got to look at NASCAR's track record. I mean, how many guys died of a basilar skull injury before it was Earnhardt? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The only one that
exactly.
survived was Stanley Smith. That's about it in that time period before Earnhardt lost.
Yeah, because you had Kenny Irwin,
Adam Petty.
Yeah, you had several guys die of the very same injury before.
But Alexander afterwards, and that's when they finally mandated the Hans device.
Right. And the funny thing is, it's uncomfortable, and
yeah,
it's interesting.
Head and neck restrained, even the helmets back then. That's why Earnhardt never
open face helmets. Yeah. Or that even some of the drivers would cut the seatbelt so they could turn in the seat better.
Yeah, they
were. I mean, the old story is Earnhardt wore his seatbelt. Pulled his one arm out of the seatbelt, and then they tried to crucify Bill Simpson when when indeed it was Earnhardt actually using the equipment improperly, which caused Bill Simpson to just kind of turn away and walk away from NASCAR. You're going to sue me, hey,
exactly.
So but at the end of the day, though, I don't know if super speedway racing needs to go away.
Because it gets kind of
because
how the drivers feel about
but you've got
Indycars. Drivers compared to the fans.
Yeah, but you've got to get some space between those cars. You can't have them all running bumper to bumper, 3-4 wide, because that's just a recipe for disaster.
But you're never going to get that, But the only way to do that is to remove the tapered space, to let the cars run full open. Then they won't have that. The reason they run bumper to bumper is because of the restrictable tapered spaces, whatever you want to call it these days. That's because you limit your horsepower. That's the only reason they run so close, because you're engine limited in these cars, and
they're all essentially equal.
Yeah, so you're never going to stop that from happening with the current regulations and the current and again. But that's why people want to watch it, because they want to watch pack racing. They don't want to watch single file Kansas racing every week.
Speaking of Kansas, that's where we're heading.
Well,
next.
Yeah, but exactly. But they want to watch, the pack racing. So again, it's the mentality of people. It's the mentality of the people. They want to watch the wrecks. They want to watch the big one. When you had these guys dying as regular as they were in the 50s and 60s, as tragic as it was a different world then. We just, the whole world had just come off the back of a world war where young guys were being killed on a daily basis, and it was just, another one's gone. We'll just find another driver. We don't have that mentality anymore. And yes, things have been done to improve safety, but it's still an incredibly dangerous sport. And at some point, it's going to hit. And it's going to hit hard, and something bad is going to happen. And if it carries on like this, in the next 5 years, we'll lose a driver. I'm pretty confident of that. As horrible as I hate saying that, but if in 5 years' time we have this conversation, we haven't lost a driver, I'll be incredibly grateful. But I fear that we will, because we're going back to where we were in Formula One in the 90s. We just think we can just keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And we've had all these accidents. The Dillon, the Newmans, the Logano's. I remember Carl Larson going up, end over end, and Christopher Bell in the truck at Daytona, wasn't it? He had a huge wreck.
Yeah, Joey truck was destroyed too.
And Austin Dillon up in the catch fence.
Yeah, there's so many of those. At some point,
even the Daytona 500, Keselowski's rear end to hit the fence and destroy a bunch of cars in the progress.
We're getting complacent about it. And at some point, it's got to stop. It has to stop. Not for the sports point of view, but for these guys, they're real people. The problem is we put them on this pedestal as race car drivers. We think they're superhuman. We think they're invincible. We see them walk away from these huge wrecks, and they're not superhuman. They're just like you or I. And at some point, something bad's going to happen, and it's not good. I remember, what was it, Jeff Gordon, when he did his last race or last season, and he finished Talladega, and I remember him saying, "Well, I'm glad that's over with. I don't have to do that again." They're just, they know the risks, but the pressure is on them. And
I could tell you, I wouldn't be surprised if once Newman calls it a career, he'd be glad he's not doing any super speedway racing.
Even before his Daytona accident, he always used to, because Carl Edwards almost went through his windshield.
Yeah, even like when I was when the media bullpen after the Busch Clash, where only 6-car finish, pretty much I think Newman told Hamlin, if I remember, is it worth ripping?
Is it worth it?
Yeah, is it worth ripping dollar bills, millions of dollars just to destroy cars? Only 6 of them finish.
Yeah,
and then what was it? 9 days later, he had that wreck.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's. Oof. Yeah, I worry. I really do. And not just from a sporting perspective, but from a human perspective, we forget about it. And these guys are husbands and wives and fathers and the like. And yeah, we lose track of that at times. And we've seen it happen. And as I say, you look at, I hate to say it, as you said earlier, Frank, some of the younger generation of drivers, they don't get it. When you listen to
that for the past several
Logano, when you listen to Logano talk, he's an older head on, in the series. Newman, they get it. But, some of the younger kids, they revel in it. And they go, oh, look at that guy, this huge wreck. And, oh, yeah, no, it's not good. I worry. I really do. But yeah.
All right.
Let's hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I really do. I hope I'm wrong.
All right. Well, let's move on to another topic. And that topic being Kansas coming up this week. So, so Richard, who do you like for the Kansas single file race?
You watch. I said that now. It'd be an absolute.
I know. Yeah. I actually
Kevin Harvick.
There you go. He needs to win.
Yes, SHR have been off. They're the only one of the big teams. I don't think none of those cars have won a race yet this year, have they?
Nope,
not yet.
I think Hendrick and Hendrick, Penske, and Gibbs have been dominating the win charts, haven't they?
Yep, pretty much the whole season. The only notable is just Michael McDowell's 500 win for.
Yeah.
All right, so Louise, who you like for Kansas?
I think Logano bounces back from Talladega and scores to win.
All right, and I'm going to go with Kyle Busch. There's a guy that needs to win this year. There's a guy who's won pretty much everywhere, and there you go. So we got a few minutes left to talk about Formula One. Now, Richard, there's a new qualifying format in Formula One that's coming up, and it's the sprint race. So it's essentially a little half distance race, or not quite a half distance race where they don't have to make a pit stop, and that's going to decide the qualifying positions. My concern with this is, crash damage. I mean, because you talk about if you're just trying to lay down a fast lap in a qualifying session, stay away from everybody else. That's one thing. If you're trying to make a bunch of passes and advance your position on the track, that's a whole different ball game. So personally, I feel that the Formula One knockout qualifying is pretty darn entertaining as it is.
Yeah.
But they're going to try this to spice up the show, I guess. And I guess we're doing it 2 or 3 times this year.
I think the plan is to do it 3 times this year, starting at Silverstone. And I think you're trying to fix something that isn't broken. As you say, I think the qualifying format they have in Formula One is probably the best of the 3 series that we have. The 3 main series that we talk about on the show. I think it's a pretty good qualifying format. I think it works pretty well. It throws up the odd surprise. But at the end of the day, your fastest guy is going to be on pole, pretty much. And, you deserve that. You deserve, if you're the fastest driver in the fastest car, you deserve to be on pole and you deserve to win races. You're trying to put something out there. So you have, so what you'll have now is have practice on Friday, qualifying Friday afternoon for the sprint race. Then you have another practice Saturday morning, the sprint race Saturday, and then the results from that will decide the grid for the race on Sunday. I think it's along those lines. And, that's not my biggest criticism. If you want to do it, okay, fine, let's try it out. I don't have a problem with that. My biggest criticism of it is they've openly said, we're going to do it on 3 races this year. And even if we do decide to roll it out into 2022, it's not going to be at every race. Some races, we're not going to have that. Now, that's where I think Formula One has an advantage over the other racing series is its continuity. Outside of Monaco, which is an exception to the rule, every other race weekend is exactly the same format in Formula One. Friday, you got 2 practice sessions. Saturday morning, you got a practice session. Then Saturday afternoon, you got qualifying, race Sunday afternoon. It's consistent. And that is one. And it sounds really stupid, but I think that's one of the successes of Formula One compared to the other racing series. Other racing series, they have a 2-day weekend, a 3-day weekend, a 1-day weekend. They have this type of qualifying, that type of qualifying. It's difficult for people to keep up.
Or no qualifying at all, where they determine it based on mathematical numbers.
Yeah, stupid stuff like that. I mean, hey, if you want to get to that stage, just draw numbers out of a hat, but make it consistent. Make it consistent. And, but then you're also going to, well, what's the racing going to be like on the Saturday? Are you going to have guys pushing it to, potentially knock a wing off or knock a suspension upright off, cause damage? And as we saw from, the race 2 weeks ago at Imola there, where George Russell and Valtteri Bottas had that accident, that's $1 million worth of damage to those cars. And now you've got the budget restrictions in place in Formula One. Toto Wolff said, well, look, we were tight on budget as it is. Now we've had this accident. What do we do? Do we have to fire people to pay for the repairs? It's a fine line here. And
that's the thing, man. Do you risk it if you gain a position on the grid?
I mean,
the risk versus reward.
Yeah, I don't understand.
It's phenomenal because if you end up crashing, well, then you're starting at the back of the grid.
So how is the grid on the Friday afternoon going to be different from the grid that would be on a Saturday afternoon under the current qualifying format? Probably no different at all. So why are we putting this extra element in there? At the end of the day, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And I don't think Formula One qualifying is broken. I think it's pretty good. But we've talked about this till the cows come home on this show, haven't we? Or I have anyway. I know I've raised this point. You have a fundamental problem in racing, okay? You have qualifying. And over the course of qualifying, typically your fastest car is first and your slowest car is last. And you have a little bit of variance in the middle where people make mistakes or whatever it may be. And then you go into a race on a Sunday where the fastest car starts first and the slowest car starts last, and you expect them to overtake each other? Well, I mean, you don't have to be a genius to work out that's not going to happen. Or that much, anyway. The only way it's going to happen is when you have some cars that are set up better for qualifying and some cars that are better set up for the race. But because of the development of simulation and the tools like that available to these Formula One teams now, you don't really get that like you used to. You used to have a car that was really good at qualifying but bad in there. You just don't get that these days. So you have a fundamental problem there of putting the fastest car first and the slowest car last. Then do you pick names out of a hat to decide the grid? Well, is that fair? You could argue it's not, because it's random. And, over the course of 22 races or 23 races or whatever it is, it would probably even itself out. And you look at every driver's average starting position and they'd be within a place or two of each other. So you could never argue that. But if you're going to do that, maybe that's what you do. Goodness me, throw a darts competition in there. See which driver can get closer to the bullseye from 8 feet. Is that what we're trying to do here? What are we trying to fix with this? Make more races during the weekend for the fans to watch? We'll make the race double headers and, make the points count equally. I wouldn't be adverse to that. I think that'd be quite good having two races. But then you're diluting the product. Would you get the same viewing figures on a Saturday and Sunday as you do for Sunday? I just think I'm trying to fix something that isn't necessarily broken. What are you trying to achieve here? Formula One viewing figures are pretty damn good right now.
Exactly.
The racing's pretty good.
Exactly my point. Yeah, there's Formula One is still drawing tons of viewers internationally. Yeah. And so why are we trying to
it'll just confuse people.
Yeah.
Because if you don't watch the race on the Saturday and you turn in on a Sunday, then you're like, oh well, why is so and so down in 20th? Oh well, they had an accident, on the Saturday. Oh, okay. Well, it just as the thing that I always like about Formula One, and I think there's been its key to its success for so many years, is its structure and its predictability in terms of how things work. And now you're trying to throw an element in there that just, I don't know. It's not like, I understand where, and this isn't being disrespectful, but I understand where an IndyCar or NASCAR would throw in some of these quirky situations because they're chasing viewers. Formula One isn't. I don't know what the viewing figures are like, but they must be pretty high. They certainly haven't dropped off massively in the last few years. So just embrace the sport for what it is. It's the pinnacle of racing. It's the pinnacle of engineering in the automotive industry. It's the pinnacle of driver performance, fitness levels, these are the best 20 drivers, or 19 and Mazepin in the world. Sorry, that wasn't cool. But
that was funny though.
But these are the guys who are the best. Embrace it for what it is. Embrace them for being the best drivers in the world and appreciate what we're watching. Big that up, highlight that, and don't try and create something that isn't. Don't try and manipulate Formula One, because Formula One's better than that. And I can see how they do it in other series to try and increase spectator numbers and the like. I get that. You don't need to do it in Formula One. You really, really, really don't. If you want more on-track action, as I say, make it a double-header race. Make two races on a weekend or whatever. And I think most people will be in favour of that. But don't have reverse grids or success ballast or any of this crap you see in other series, because Formula One is supposed to be the purest form of racing. And you're just trying to fix something that isn't broken.
Couldn't have said it any better, honestly. It sounds a bit gimmicky. I understand the need of it for Formula 2. You have features and sprints, or the other way around now. It's one thing to have it there, but for Formula 1, just to determine Sunday's lineup, is notably the big races, which it does look like it might be catered towards, the major ones like Silverstone and Monza, with one other one yet to be determined. There's really no need to it. It's just, they only award points for the top three finishers, just 3, 2, and 1, but it's pushing the line of gimmicks.
It is. And, I understand how and actually feature races and sprint races in Formula 2 are massively useful for these young drivers to learn about tyre handling and tyre management and things like that. That you don't want these young kids having 20-lap sprint races all the time, because when they get to Formula One, they're not going to understand tyre management and how to racecraft, things that we don't appreciate so much as maybe goes a little bit unnoticed. But that's where stuff like the sprint race and the feature race is essential in the driver development. You're in Formula One, you don't need to develop anymore. You've done that. You've got to where you are. So just let it be. Embrace it for what it is in terms of the purity of it, and don't try and make something that doesn't. It almost thinks if you're creating a problem so that you can fix it. I don't know. Maybe I'm completely wrong, and this is going to be a massive success, and we're going to turn around and say, "God, we should have done this 20 years ago." But
the jury's out there, but at the same time, we are almost out of time. So, where are we off to next week in Formula One?
Portugal.
Oh, that'll be a great race. So, who do you like for Portugal?
You can't really look past Verstappen, I don't think. I mean, I think he had the car and he had the beating of Lewis at at Imola, despite what some of the things that were coming out of it. But no, I think that Verstappen will be strong, and I hope and I think that Russell will get some points this weekend. I really think that he'll be very, very motivated after what happened at Imola and some of the things that were said, which I think were very unfair. We talked about it last week, but if the kid hadn't gone for that move, people would be criticizing him for not going for that move. So I think put Verstappen down for the win and Russell to nick a point or two at the end there.
All right, sounds good. Now, Louise, who do you like?
I think it's going to be back and forth between Hamilton and Verstappen. I think I'm going to go with Verstappen on this one. He takes the championship lead for the first time in his career outright.
Yep. Yeah, it's hard to think, isn't it? Yeah.
All right, so I'll go with Hamilton just because. Why not? He's won a race or two, from my understanding.
Yeah, he knows what he's doing, doesn't he?
Yeah. So
this would be 100. This would be 100, wouldn't it? No, it would be 99.
I was going to say, it's getting close, yeah.
Is it
all right,
poles? Pole would be 100 pole positions?
That's where he has more poles at the moment than race wins by a few.
Okay. There you go. Yeah.
All right, so we are out of time. But quick program note: Turkey will replace Montreal on the Formula One calendar. We didn't get to that story, which also leaves the question of the IndyCar race up in Canada in Toronto in question as well. But we'll cover that next week as well. But I want to thank you, Louise. I want to thank you, Richard. I want to thank the Hoobazoo Radio Network, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, and iHeartRadio for covering us. And I want to thank you folks who listen to us. So till next week, good night.
WHOOBAZOO, that's Hoobazoo.com.
Enter website.